And we are going to focus on the third demand because at the heart of it is the call for a Citizens Assembly on climate and ecological justice. It just must be absolutely clear that XR is not trying to exert its will on anyone or claim we have all the answers. We just think it's now time for the UK public to have a say on how the UK responds to this crisis. We also feel that if we achieve the third demand, the first and the second will fall in place because the truth will be told and the government will have to act. So what is a Citizens Assembly? They are a key mechanism of what is technically known as deliberative or participatory democracy. So as indicated, participatory means that people participate, and we'll go into a bit more detail about what deliberative is a bit further on in the talk. So what's it mean in practice? Well, let's take a look. And we can have the next. So you might recognize this picture on the left. It was taken in the House of Commons, and it was actually during a net zero carbon emission debate in 2019. And no, they weren't socially distancing. This was pre-COVID, but only 40 MPs out of 650 showed up. And this was the first climate debate in over 2 years. And secondly, it was that year that I don't know if you remember that we had record-breaking February temperatures. So there was a total lack of concern amongst our politicians. The other thing to notice in this photograph is how the two sides are facing each other. They are literally in opposition, looking to score points and win. And this positioning is really a key factor in their inability to tackle the climate and ecological crisis because there is no dialogue across the aisle. The picture on the right is an image of what we could have. It's a Citizens Assembly where all sorts of different people come together to find solutions. You can notice how they're working in groups, and it's very much a collaborative, not an oppositional approach. And it's collaboration that we need. So the current system has proved that it cannot deal with the emergency. It has taken next to no action on the matter. So let's have a look at the problems with the current UK parliamentary system. So the standard election cycle runs every 5 years, and it's 4 years in some other countries. And that's when we as voters, we hand over our power by electing one person to represent us on a range of very different issues on which they're generally not experts. And in the UK, what's more, the voting system is first past the post, so we don't even have proportional representation. The landscape is dominated by just two parties. Many people, as we know, are disillusioned, and the voter turnout is very, very low. A recent survey found that 6% of the public have full trust in the current political system, while 89% support constitutional reform. The other thing is short-term decision-making. We've known about this emergency for well over 40 years, but as most politicians only see as far as their next election campaign, they don't actually want to do anything that they fear might be widely unpopular and affect their re-election, no matter how necessary or essential it might be, such as with the climate and nature crisis. It's not truly representative. The majority of the politicians are from very similar privileged backgrounds, and quite honestly, it's often very much in their interest to maintain things as they are. They have to align with their party, and they are actually told how to vote. And what's more, their party often falls in line with vested interests, the funders, the media moguls. So in actual fact, there's a whole other influence that is totally undemocratic that's happening through the back door. And it's no secret that many politicians are influenced by their funders, which is often in conflict with what is best for most of us. 5, the result is that issues as far-reaching and complex as the climate and ecological emergency cannot be resolved by a system where there is limited opportunity for any alternative or radical ideas. And basically, our current political system doesn't support politicians to make those difficult decisions that have to be made, and nor, and more importantly, or as importantly, does it allow citizens a say in what type of future they want, what sort of future we want. This is the parliamentary system we have, but the system that we need to try and tackle this issue is a Citizens Assembly, which has good problem-solving capabilities. So how does it work? Before the Citizens Assembly starts, there are 2 requirements that have to be in place. One is a viable question needs to be formed that allows for real decision-making by the Assembly members, or the Assembly itself must have the power to frame the question. And right from the beginning, must be clear what the government will do with the Assembly's recommendations. There has to be a public commitment to responding to or acting on the recommendations with a timescale. So we're going to have a little quick look at how it works, and there are 6 main steps. The first one is sortition. This is a fancy name really for a process whereby members of the Assembly are selected randomly using a random selection, which is similar to UK jury duty. And the aim of sortition is to create a diverse group of citizens which broadly mirrors the age, the gender, the geographical location, ethnicity, and class characteristics of the population as a whole. Sort of everyday people from different walks of life, broadly representative of the community. So it could be a mix, it'd be a baker, doctor, shop assistant, transport worker, student, and more. So in the first instance, it works along lines like this. Not exactly. This is sort of just to give you an overall impression of how it happens. Letters are sent to thousands of people randomly across the UK, inviting them to indicate their willingness to be part of an assembly. So if you choose to accept the invitation, so there were people who will choose to accept and those who refuse, your name will go into a hat for a second round. And then these positive responses are stratified. That means that they're basically sorted into categories, as I mentioned before, age, class, etc. And it's from these category groups that a second random selection takes place, and then these are the people who are invited to take part. It's important to note that Assembly members receive remuneration and all expenses are covered in order travel, food, childcare or caring needs, and this is to make it as possible as it can be made that people of all backgrounds feel able and supported to take part. Step 2 is learning. All the Assembly members receive training in critical thinking and hidden bias. And then they hear from a range of speakers, and this includes experts such as scientists, economists, historians, stakeholders, power companies, activists and environmental organizations, and rights holders such as farmers, young people, and people who've already been affected. The Assembly members can ask questions, have things explained, and have facts checked. There's an oversight body. There are various checks and balances in setting up a citizens' assembly, but there's an oversight body that ensures that the presentations are fair, they're wide-ranging and balanced, and that presenters with particular interests are clearly identified. So, for example, somebody from the fossil fuel industry who might present is clearly going to have a pro-fossil fuel bias. Step 3, this is, I think, is a really great addition to the sort of the process, is there are submissions from the public. The broader public can feed in on topics or issues that they would like the Assembly to consider. And usually there's a mechanism in place whereby the issues and suggestions are collated and then presented to the Assembly for consideration. So it extends sort of the sort of democratic voice that can feed in. Step 4 is deliberation. Now, this is where the magic actually happens. After having all this learning that's taken place, they break into small groups of about 8 to 12 people, and they discuss what they've heard, how it impacts themselves and their community and the wider population. They listen to each other and deliberate together, and that's the word, deliberation. This is a process of talking, exploring feelings, and understanding that other people have different views, they have different needs or opinions, and they look to find common ground in the best interests of everyone. Each group has a trained facilitator who makes sure everyone's voice is heard and no one person dominates the discussion. Step 5 is when they go on to draft and vote on the recommendations. They produce a report which includes the reasons for backing the recommendations it makes, and it shows the reasons why they were made, as well as a summary of different views on the subject. All this is recorded. And then step 6, the government responds and implements the recommendations. And for that to happen, it is going to need us all, the greater public, to push for it. Right, we go and have a look at one that we always cite, is in the Irish Assembly. It was one of the earlier ones. And it was just to let you know that we're not setting a precedent by calling for a UK-wide Citizens Assembly on the climate and ecological emergency, because we've only got to look to Ireland for an example of how citizens' assemblies are being used to enhance the democratic process. The assembly was established by the Irish Parliament. There were 99 citizens who were selected, and this first one that they held actually deliberated on 5 issues over the course of 1.5 years. Since then, they've had citizens' assemblies, several citizens' assemblies. One of the last ones was a citizens' assembly on biodiversity loss, which also included a children and young persons assembly that sat in alongside it. But anyway, so the most notable outcomes of the first citizen assembly and the 5 issues was the one on abortion, that the assembly broke the political deadlock that had been present for years in Ireland, and it helped to inform a public debate and the framing of the question that was put to a referendum. And so what was interesting on the abortion issue was that 64% of the Assembly members agreed on the recommendations put to the Irish government. And in the referendum that followed, 66% of the electorate voted in favour of the constitutional change. So it's a real indication that the Assembly was actually quite a pretty accurate reflection of the thinking of the position of the country as a whole. So this is one of the younger members of the Irish Citizens Assembly. Nora O'Flynn, and it's quite touching actually, sort of how she felt. And what she says is, it's not just a particular type of people who've gone to college and they've studied something and they're all making views on it. You get to hear what the ordinary people, the people that it affects on the ground, how they feel about something, what they would like to change about it, and then go about it in a political manner after gaining all of the information. So we have this notion that MPs are more informed than the average person, but it's absolutely not true. In some instances, they may be, but generally, they're all presented with briefing notes shortly before a vote, and often don't have much clue about what they're voting on. Because as we've mentioned before, they're actually told how to vote by the party whip. So we could say that members of a citizens' assembly will arguably have had more time than the average politician to gain knowledge, to question experts, and to deliberate and collaborate with fellow citizens in the spirit of collaboration and not winning and losing. Right, slide 7 shows you, well, there are a lot more than that now. Real democracy processes, not always citizens' assemblies, but other deliberative and participatory processes are happening and have been happening all over the world. They're happening at local, regional, and national levels. And there's a good site, participedia.net, if you want to find about more. Just before we go on, I just would like to mention that there was a record, well, a historical precedent was set in Paris. In Paris, they have a permanent citizens' assembly, and it has actually written up the legislation and has been passed directly into law by the city council. And so that's a very interesting development. Now, we'd like to play a little clip to give you a flavour, just a little flavour of what can be achieved when people come together like this. It's slightly dated, I have to warn you. It was filmed at an event called America in One Room. It isn't a citizen assembly, but a deliberative poll, but it does give you an insight into the power of discussion and collective intelligence.
In the heart of Texas.
Last table on your left, they will check you in.
A little bit more serious, that's beautiful. Yeah, there, that's great.
526 Americans gathering.
I love this. Great, thank you so much.
Upset about the partisan divide.
Let's be real.
This is an experiment, a scientific sample. Democrat, Republican, and Independent, representing 47 states.
You are going to listen to other people whom you never ordinarily would encounter.
Reflecting who votes on Election Day.
Hey, how are you?
It's a 4-day in-person poll called America in One Room. Before arriving, this group took one poll on the major issues in the 2020 election. Here,
it's a great question.
They listened to candidates, to experts.
This is really your time to have your voice heard.
And break into randomly selected small groups to talk.
When's the last time you talked to a 70-year-old white Republican?
I don't think I've ever talked to a 70-year-old white Republican until now.
You know, we're being stormed at the southern border, and that's a problem that needs to be dealt with.
The illegal immigrants that we have today, you can see it all of the time, waving their country's flags, burning the American flag.
Sure, on TV you see the ones that do all this crazy stuff, but most of them work.
Like the country, this group is deeply divided about immigration.
I feel like you should have a wall, a border wall.
And along comes ICE, deports them. How can we continue to do that? In America. We don't want to learn your language. We don't want to follow your customs. We follow our own customs. And to me, it looks like they don't want to become Americans.
You know, Gary, your family were illegal immigrants. The American Indians, this was their country. Yeah. All of us came here, and we didn't learn their language, we didn't learn their customs. We said, you take ours, and you take it now. So we're all children of illegal immigrants. I don't know how we can be so choosy about the new ones.
That got to be a little heated in there.
It definitely did. But we've all respected one another and got to hear each other's opinions. And I never thought I would be able to relate to someone that was a Republican. And I have, more than once.
More than once.
Right.
I think it's been interesting to talk to Trump supporters because I don't meet many.
She's like, I don't want to be a part of this.
Seeing all of these people from all of these other walks of life, exactly how my views have changed on it, I'm not so hardcore.
And what is your advice about political discourse in this country?
You need to listen, not yell, not scream. You need to talk.
At the end,
And this is how your voice will be heard.
a closing poll to see if there's been any movement on the issues, but already visible.
It's opened my mind to see that I need to listen to other people's views.
Is the recognition that there is unexpected power
I really enjoyed you being here.
in bridging the divide.
I have enjoyed this beyond measure.
Well, the irony is he's back in the race now, isn't he? So even though this is 4 years ago, it's like no time has gone by at all. But yeah, anyway, the reason why we share that is because it's just such a powerful example of what happens when you put people in a room outside of their own little bubbles or echo chambers, and how much you can achieve by listening and learning from each other. So yeah, we like that clip. So we'll just keep using it. Seems like history is repeating itself anyway. So there we go. So yeah, just to give a quick recap on what Kathy's been saying, is that we like citizens assemblies, and we think that a citizens assembly is really what's needed for something so enormous and complex and urgent like the climate and ecological emergency. Is because they can think long term, they break political deadlock, they're fair, real representation of society, it's transparent, informed, discussed and deliberated recommendations, and we have the collective intelligence of people working together on something and not on opposite sides. So we're often asked why we recommend a UK-wide citizens assembly. Why not small local citizens assemblies? And this is not at all to discourage people from organizing local deliberative processes. In fact, Kathy and I are both part of the community assemblies group as well, which is the local deliberative processes that you can organize on sort of a council level, borough level, that sort of thing. But this big citizens assembly on climate and ecological justice, we believe really needs to happen at the UK-wide level. It is needed for coordinated and urgent government action. At the end of the day, the big decisions, aviation, transport, agriculture, education, healthcare, housing, all those big decisions are made at the UK level. The council doesn't have power to change. I mean, although there are bits that they can decide, the big policies need to come from the UK level, and that's where the citizens need to tell the folks in Westminster what it is that we want them to do. We also need everyone in the same room for UK-wide policy changes. So to make sure that, again, it's coordinated and we're all working together. So local deliberative processes are extremely important. And again, we really don't want to discourage anyone. In fact, we really love community assemblies, and we've been part of and helped organize numerous community assemblies all over the UK. But they can make choices, they can make decisions on a local level. So it's really important to see where the power is. And for example, if you're going to have a citizens assembly on how to tackle global climate change in your local council, that isn't really going to make a massive difference. But if you think about, okay, how might the council deal with XYZ on a local level, then you can actually get some really, really useful recommendations. And again, as I said, this is a global crisis. It's the UK government that represents us in international negotiations. So we need to make sure that they sit around the table at the UN, at the various COP processes, knowing full well what it is the citizens want them to do, with recommendations that have come out of true deliberative processes. So there has been a Citizens Assembly in the UK on climate change. It was called Climate Assembly UK. It's happened a fair few years ago now. And the question was, how can the UK reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050? So immediately we came upon this huge issue, which many of you who are in the climate activist space know that a target of 2050 is just completely inadequate and is really playing with the lives of millions of people. So we, as the working group, did say, can the date be deliberated on by the members of the Assembly? And unfortunately, they said no. This is set in stone. We're going with this target. So then we said, as XR-UK, in that case, good luck with your assembly, but we cannot support it, and we would not consider this as the third demand being met, because it just isn't adequate. But there were some good things that came out of it. The citizens all agreed that once they'd received all this information about climate change and how bad the situation is, they all agreed that everyone should know this information, which, funnily enough, sounds a lot like XR's first demand of tell the truth, that the government and the media need to give better climate information and leadership to the people in this country. So we definitely agree on that. They also agreed, without being prompted, that fairness is absolutely key. It needs to be fair. The most vulnerable, the poorest of society cannot be carrying the burden of the changes that need to come from Climate Assembly. And all the citizens were very much agreed on that. They also didn't like the reliance on future technologies. So stuff like carbon capture, things that is just not been proven, it's not scalable yet. They were extremely uncomfortable in gambling our future on technologies that have not been proven yet. And what was really exciting for us is that they agreed that there should be more citizens' assemblies. There should definitely be a follow-up citizens' assembly, and they wanted more deliberative democracy. So that was really exciting to see. But the limitations were severe, and it really wasn't what XR would expect from our third demand. So the date obviously was set for 2050. There was a very limited remit. For example, freight or import emissions weren't considered. So for example, here in the UK, we actually produce very little. We don't manufacture. So our emissions of the stuff that we buy here, but that's actually manufactured, for example, in India or in China, wasn't calculated with our emissions, and we thought that was not good enough. No publicity, not enough publicity. Although there is a great documentary on BBC iPlayer. I don't actually know if it's still showing, but the People versus Climate Change on BBC iPlayer. But it was very niche. You had to really know about it in order to see this documentary, and the general public just did not know it existed, and it was just advisory. The government made absolutely no commitment to taking on these recommendations, and lo and behold, they haven't actually taken on any of the recommendations, so it was limited in that sense. So what do we want to see, and what would a Citizens Assembly on Climate and Ecological Justice look like? What in our head would meet XR's third demand? So it would be run by independent organizations, so not by the government, not by Extinction Rebellion, but by independent charities that already exist, who are completely experienced with delivering deliberative processes like citizens' assemblies. We'd also expect there to be several citizens' assemblies happening at the same time on different themes. So what we can imagine would happen is, for example, they would gather at first 500 or 1,000 people. They would all come together. They would probably get all the same basic information initially, like the critical thinking, basics on climate change, that sort of thing. But that they would then break up into smaller groups of 100 to discuss various themes and topics, because obviously this issue is massive and it would change everything. So we can't just have one group of 100 people deciding on all these different issues. We also think it's absolutely key that the group never breaks down to smaller than 100, because the 100 is really the minimal amount of people you need to keep that nice representative sample of society as a whole. Anything smaller and you lose that diversity that makes a citizens' assembly so inclusive. And what's so important is that justice must be central to all decision making. So, for example, if you hear of a solution that they say, okay, we're going to put loads of wind turbines in the Clashendara forest in North Scotland, but someone says, well, actually, that is the last remaining habitat of the last remaining Scottish wildcats, then that is not climate and ecological justice. So climate and ecology and environment need to always be considered together. Also, if there's wind or solar panel farms being put up in Morocco, which then has a lead straight to the UK, and the people in Morocco don't get any of that energy, that is also not climate and ecological justice. It cannot just benefit one part of the population and negatively impact the rest. It has to be just, it has to be fair. So it's extremely complicated, but it means that we avoid at all costs doing harm to other groups of humans, but also non-humans and living beings. Otherwise, we just won't get the sustainable solutions that we need. There's also a minimum of time. We think that at least 6 weekends is needed to go through the learning phase, the deliberation phase, and putting together the recommendations at the end. And people are really worried that this would be an endless project and that we would never get the results and this would all just take too long and we should just get on with it. But actually, the many experts that we've spoken to who could potentially deliver this say that it wouldn't actually take that long, that if we commissioned a citizen, if a citizens' assembly was commissioned by the government tomorrow, it could already start in about 2 to 3 months, and we would actually have the recommendations within the next 9 months. So that is actually for recommendations that are fair, inclusive, long-term and robust and radical enough for what's needed. That's actually pretty good. And then obviously Kathy and I have talked you through the mechanics of what a citizens' assembly is, and we won't pretend that we can pack all of what climate and ecological justice is just in one slide, and you know, we're not pretending that we're able to do that, but we do want to just address it briefly, even though again this talk is more about the mechanics of a citizens' assembly, and I do really recommend that you do research and learn more about what climate and ecological justice actually is. But just in a nutshell, it is the understanding that the crisis, so the climate and ecological crisis, affects people and countries differently. So we're not all affected the same. The most vulnerable, people in the global south, people from lower income backgrounds, people from different ethnicities, they are affected differently than other people. And they also don't all bear the same amount of responsibility. Some people and some countries live much more carbon intensive and environmentally destructive lives than others. So we have to recognize that some people in some countries must act much quicker and bear much more of the responsibility. Non-human species must be considered. This isn't just about human life. This is about all life on Earth. We understand that we are part of an ecosystem, and without non-human species, we as humans also won't be able to survive. So non-human species have a right to exist, be safe from harm, and thrive. It's also about indigenous peoples and their right to act as guardians of nature, and that we respect and understand the value of traditional life and all these centuries and centuries of wisdom, knowledge, and experience that these people have gathered, and that we should learn from and protect and respect. It's also the recognition that systemic drivers underlying climate and ecological breakdown are the same drivers of many of the other crises that we are seeing around the world. And this is how we're all connected. So things like colonialism, both historical and ongoing today, racism, oppression, inequality, war, violence, and genocide are all driven by these same systems, the political systems, the economic systems, and also the judicial systems that we are fighting as climate and ecological activists are the same systems that are also creating those crises. And in that way, we are very much connected, and the struggle is one and the same. Without climate and ecological justice, we cannot develop fair, long-term and robust solutions. And that's why the third demand isn't just a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological emergency, but on climate and ecological justice. And it's a very specific concept that embodies. Okay, I think that is enough from us. Sorry, we did overrun a little bit, so many apologies. There's some contact information for you there, but I'll share some stuff in the chat as well. Let me stop sharing the screen and give you the floor, really. Let's see if there are any questions from the crew. Does anyone have any questions for us? And while you're thinking, I'll get the information on here that I can pop in the chat with various links and stuff.
2 questions, if possible. I came across something on television a couple of years back about a citizens' assembly that took place in Birmingham about the environment. I reckon it was 2020, 2021. Do you know about that one? I don't know. I heard nothing more. Second question, why so much success in Ireland? Because I would be overjoyed if we had anything as successful in England. National differences.
Yeah, so interestingly, the Birmingham one that you're talking about, that was Climate Assembly UK that I just explained about. So that was the one with how might we get to net zero by 2050.
Okay.
So it was quite it was quite a big deal that it happened, but like you said, it got completely ignored by the government. And we do wish that, given it more publicity, we wish that, you know, if everyone was talking about it, you know, in the pub, with friends, family, everywhere, it was in the media, everywhere. We think it could have created more pressure, but this way, no one knew about it, and it was very easy for the government to just sweep it under the rug and ignore it. So that was quite a waste, really. And sorry, I've already forgotten what your second question was.
I was just so positively impressed by the Irish abortion one, and they did several others. And I somehow have a negative feeling, could the English achieve the same kind of thing? Because that was such an important, you know, complicated topic for the Irish, given the power of the church.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, sorry, Kathy, you go, because
I think in a nutshell, it's down to political will. That's what it's down to. And in Ireland, there is a political will to engage with the citizens, as there is increasingly in all countries around, well, most countries, loads of countries around the world, as there's a recognition that, you know, that the I wouldn't call it democracy. I call it the electoral systems that we're using and living under are really quite broken. You know, they're antiquated, and they're not representative, and power is in the hands of a few, and it affects the lives of the many. So yes, it is political will, and unfortunately we're apart from Belarus, we're the only other country in Europe that has first past the post. So it's two parties, and you know, they're very happy batting power back and forth between them. And so it's the pressure needs to come from people. We need to pressurize our MPs to. They're recognizing that the system's pretty broken. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to say that in the UK, Wales has actually done various citizens' assemblies, and so has Scotland. And there have been some citizen assemblies in for Westminster, but yeah, they've ignored them. But yeah, Wales and Scotland in that sense are quite far ahead from our friends in Westminster. So yeah, should we all move to Wales or Scotland? I don't know. I mean, maybe. But you know, there are actually some deliberative democracy experts who are feeling very optimistic and think that there might actually be a citizens' assembly commissioned by the Labour government at some stage. But we're waiting to see. And in the meantime, that is our job, is to keep that pressure on, to say that this is what's needed and this is what people want. So yeah.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Neil, go for it. I'm so sorry about those weird captions. I don't know what they are. We need to find a different version of that clip.
I mean, if it is it a YouTube video?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I must admit, I'm mildly distracted trying to work out what the language is.
I know, it's so annoying. I'm so sorry.
But don't apologise, because I think it's a really useful clip, especially given where it came from and stuff like that. I guess if I'm kind of conscious of being I'm going to use the phrase, a kind of critical friend about some of this stuff, because yeah, there's no question that every now and again I think, yes, I believe the hype that Citizens Assemblies is demand that is XR superpower, right? As is often promoted in various circles. But I just had two things. One is you kind of alluded to it, was the framing of the question is very, very important. And so there's power in that moment. And that clearly was the case with the Citizens Assembly on the climate change. In fact, it was completely non-binding. I mean, so there's just two things with that, is recognizing that, and it's almost like, who creates the question? Who decides how we decide? That is quite a moving, because that really puts power in that. And also, I'm keen to sort of come to the Upgrade Democracy event to learn more and see it in action, because from the experience I've had of peoples and assemblies in particular, there's also quite a bit of power inherent in the note takers and the people who replay information back to the wider assembly. So one has to be mindful of that. Anyway, the thing I was kind of come to is not just that, but asking for more examples than just the Irish, great though it is, because as a sort of business data analyst, a data set of one is not overly compelling. So that's one thing to sort of bear in mind. If there can be more prepared, that'd be great. And also, and the sort of second thing I was just going to ask is, do we know what the Labour government's disposition is towards these things? Because I've seen a couple of a video of a new MP standing up in Parliament and going, "This place is a shit show the way it's organised," and you know the very combative nature of it. And I just wondered if there was any. I know they've got a lot on their plate at the minute and doing some other good things, as to what the disposition the current government is to do something about that. So there's the two things there: more examples and what's Labour's disposition.
Just with regard to the more examples, we do another talk called Around the World in 8 CAs. We can't, it would just be too long. That's what we do too. It's a follow-up one that we sometimes do if it's requested. But yes, you're absolutely right to sort of understand. And, not all citizens' assemblies are equal. Lots of them actually are crappy. Because we measure everything alongside a set of standards that was pulled together by various experts and academics. And we, when we look at them, we, what's the word I want? We sort of, can't think of the word. We measure them against these standards. So in terms of time, I mean, you can't have a, one citizens assembly, a local one, it was sort of 2 evenings and a Saturday. Well, I'm sorry, you can't learn and deliberate and in that amount of time. So yeah, standards are really important. With regards to Labour, it's difficult to know. I think there was Sue Gray, who's an advisor to Keir Starmer. I mean, she came out earlier in February, I think, sort of saying that Labour were going to have citizens' assemblies, and somebody shut the box on that pretty swiftly. I think perhaps it was too premature. People weren't aware of it. But certainly Ed Miliband is in favour of citizens' assemblies. And interestingly enough, it very little publicised, but part of the manifesto of the Lib Dems is citizens' assemblies, including one on climate and climate. I don't think they go into justice, but yes, just to say that I think we're sort of waiting to see.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Matthew.
Can we trust that the process will not be compromised by vested interests? I guess that relates to the previous question.
It's a good question. Interesting enough, in the most citizen assemblies, the people who take part are not in public. So the people that the lobbyists, etc., can't make contact. Although in one of the French had one on climate, Citizen Convention, and they arranged meetings and they did films and they did publicize who they were. So yes, that could leave them open to it. But generally, it's the people who take part is not known until after the event, after it's taken place. And what was unusual about the clip we saw is that was recorded during the deliberative process when people would talk. Normally, all the sessions are live streamed in all the citizens' assemblies, but the deliberation, what happens between people in their small groups, isn't usually videoed.
Yeah. So yeah, the presentations by the external speakers is live streamed, but the actual group discussions is not.
I think, the other thing to say, sorry, is that they're not perfect. They're not perfect. It's just sort of a better system to try than we have, and it involves people being involved in decision making about the lives that we're living. Sorry, Matthew, back to you. You had your finger up again.
Oh, just about the people who run them and so on. Can you trust the organizations, the facilitators and so on?
At a certain point in life, you have to trust people. There are various checks and balances that are there. I mean, I trust my fellow citizens. If they've been in that context, I trust that people will want to do the best for most of the people. I think, people do change quite considerably their position as a result of taking part in a citizens' assembly.
Yeah, and also there is obviously whoever commissions it, so say the government, then it's the organization who know the nuts and bolts of a citizens assembly and know how to organize it, but they are not a campaign group. They just want to organize a good process, and they're in that deliberative democracy space with their peers as well, saying, well, why did you organize that? That was really shit, you know. And there is that pressure from the deliberative democracy space as well. And then you have the oversight body, and those are the people with more the expertise on the actual topic, who will be from a range of, you know, so there'll be a sort of XR type person and a sort of maybe more Shell BP type person, maybe not as quite extreme as that, and then everything in between. So they will balance each other out. You know, they'll say, well, this assembly is way too much on the environmentalist side or way too much on the fossil fuel side, and they would be there to ensure that balance as well. And, you know, and then there's the citizens themselves who will be able to call out bias as soon as they see it. And the presenters have to always say where they are, you know, what their background is. So I'm here to present, but I'm a climate activist. I'm here to present, but I work for Boeing or whatever, you know. So it is, there is that transparency in that sense. But yeah, it's never perfect. You know, you're never going to get it completely perfect. I also wanted to say about the question, formulating the question, what we really think is that either you have a deliberative process on formulating the question, or if the commissioning body insists on stipulating the question in advance, there has to be space in the assembly to adjust it. So if the government says we want a question that is about net zero by 2050, they have to allow the assembly to say, yeah, but 2050 isn't good. Like, we've just seen all the evidence and 2050 isn't good enough. And there has to be that space, which Climate Assembly UK didn't allow. So there are those two ways of doing it. Sorry, we're nearly at time. We don't want to keep you too long, but please feel free to share any further questions or thoughts, if you have any. Yeah, and please do come along to Upgrade Democracy next week in Windsor. Kathy and I will be there, so do come and say hello. Come and experience a little mini, you know, short deliberative process with the Massembly. I shouldn't say mini because we're actually trying to make it massive, but you know, it's only an hour or so, so it's obviously not a proper citizens assembly. It's a mass community assembly, but it should be really fun. So do definitely come along to that, to Old Windsor. Anything else? No. Then sorry, I just see something in the chat, so let me just, how do you sign up to come along? Let me just find you the link. But meanwhile, I think Peter, you said you'd written something about your experience as part of the Assembly for People's Plan for Nature.
Yeah, it was. So sorry, Marianne. Yeah, it was. It was a while ago. WWF sent it off to the BBC for us, and I don't know where it is now. But I've tried. I've just emailed it. I emailed it to you before, but it's not letting us paste the text into the chat box. It's probably too long. But I've emailed it to that email address. You've given us there, citizensrebellion.uk, Citizens Assembly. I also emailed at the Ryan, because I had your email from last year. So I don't know if you, I can recite it if you want. I mean, I don't know how much time.
Yeah, could you resend it? Because I don't know if that's managed to get lost somewhere.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. And if everyone's interested, we can email it out so that people can see, because it's really amazing to hear from Peter, who's actually been through an actual legit citizens assembly, which is quite exciting to hear what that experience was like as well. Oh yeah, and I was going to find the how you get to the Upgrade Democracy. Sorry. upgrade democracy information is here. There you go. And that's it. Oh, well, lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for bearing with us and giving up your time on this Tuesday evening. We are also running a facilitation session, how to facilitate the Massembly on Thursday, which you're more than welcome to come along to as well. But otherwise, hopefully, we will see you all on the street in Windsor. Yay! Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you. Look forward to
See
seeing
you
some
there.
of you. Do come and say hi. Ask any questions.
Yeah, definitely. We love talking about citizens' assemblies. It's literally all we do.
Not quite.
Fantastic. See you Thursday.
Thanks very much.
Oh, see you Thursday. Lovely. Yeah, it'll be me and Kathy again, I'm afraid. So yeah, you'll have another
Fantastic.
hour.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great. Really good. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of the evening.